Welcome back. This is chapter one of What Everybody is Saying, an ex-FBI agent's guide to speed reading people by Joe Navarro. And we're on commandment two. Observing in context is key to understanding nonverbal behavior. When trying to understand nonverbal behavior in real life situations, the more you understand the context in which it takes place, the better you will be at understanding what it means. For example, after a traffic accident, I expect people to be in shock and to walk around looking dazed. I expect their hands to shake and even for them to make poor decisions like blocking into oncoming traffic. This is why officers ask you to stay in your car. Why? After an accident, people are suffering the effects of a complete hijacking of the thinking brain by a region of the brain known as the limbic system. The result of this hijacking includes behaviors such as trembling, disorientation, nervousness, and discomfort. In context, these actions are to be expected and confirm the stress from the accident. During a job interview, I expect applicants to be nervous initially and for that nervousness to dissipate. If it shows up again when I ask specific questions, then I have to wonder why these nervous behaviors have suddenly presented again. And that highlights the value of baselining. Why you baseline, establish simple, questions and answers. The how's your favorite team doing in the league? How's the weather? That was quite an election result, or maybe not an election. That seems to be too polarizing for people in our current time. But I hope you get what I mean by establishing innocuous questions and to get answers to calm somebody down. Are you looking forward to Memorial Day, barbecuing in the summer weather after a winter, things of that nature? Commandment 3. Learn to recognize and decode nonverbal behaviors that are universal. Some body behaviors are considered universal because they are exhibited similarly by most people. For instance, when people press their lips together in a manner that seems to make them disappear, it is a clear and common sign that they are troubled and something is wrong. This nonverbal behavior, known as lip compression, is one of the universal tells that I will be describing in the chapters to follow. See box 4. If you've been following along with the behavioral table of elements breakdown, you'll recognize that lip compression is row B, as in Bravo, column 12. The element card is abbreviated uppercase L, lowercase c, and it's lip compress. And it has a variety of confirming and amplifying and microphysiological gestures and displays. And it has contradictory behaviors, and that it's typically done before an answer. So if you've been following along with that series, you'll be able to understand what's being said here by Agent Navarro in his writings. The more of these universal nonverbals you can recognize and accurately interpret, the more effective you will be in assessing the thoughts, feelings, and intentions of those around you. All right, so that is commandments 2 and 3. So his insert box 4, a pursing of lips leads to saving, excuse me, a pursing of lips leads to savings on ships. Universal tells of the lips were very helpful to me during a consulting assignment with a British shipping company. My British client had asked me to sit through their contract negotiations with a huge multinational corporation that would be outfitting their vessels. I I agreed and suggested that the proposed contract be presented point by point, with agreement being reached on each item before moving forward. That way, I could more closely watch the corporate negotiator for any nonverbals that might reveal information helpful to my client. I'll pass you a note if I spot something that needs your attention, I told my client, and then settled back to watch the parties review the contract clause by clause. I didn't have long to wait before I saw an important tell. When a clause detailing the outfitting of a specific part of the vessel was read, a construction phase involving millions of dollars, the chief negotiator from the multinational corporation pursed his lips, a clear indication that something in this part of the contract was not to his liking. I passed a note to my client, warning him that this particular clause in the contract was contentious or problematic and should be revisited and discussed thoroughly while we were all still together. By confronting the issue then and there and focusing on the details of the clause in question, the two negotiators were able to hammer out an agreement face to face, which ended up saving my client $13.5 million. The negotiator's nonverbal signal of displeasure was the key evidence needed to spot a specific problem and deal with it immediately and effectively. Commandment 4. Learn to recognize and decode idiosyncratic nonverbal behaviors. Universal nonverbal behaviors constitute one group of body cues, those that are relatively the same for everyone. There is a second type of body cue called an idiosyncratic nonverbal behavior, which is a signal that is relatively unique to a particular individual. In attempting to identify idiosyncratic signals, you'll want to be on the lookout for behavioral patterns in people you interact with on a regular basis: friends, family, coworkers, persons who provide goods or services to you on a consistent basis. The better you know an individual, or the longer you interact with him or her, the easier it will be to discover this information, because you will have a larger database upon which to make your judgments. For example, if you note your teenager scratches his head and bites his lip when he is about to take a test, this may be a reliable idiosyncratic tell that speaks of his nervousness or lack of preparation. No doubt this has become part of his repertoire for dealing with stress. And you will see it again and again, because the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Commandment 5. When you interact with others, try to establish their baseline behaviors. In order to get a handle on the baseline behaviors of the people with whom you regularly interact, you need to note how they look normally, how they typically sit, where they place their hands, the usual position of their feet, their posture, and common facial expressions, the tilt of their heads, and even where they generally place or hold their possessions, such as a purse. You need to be able to differentiate between their normal face and their stressed face. Not getting a baseline puts you in the same position as parents who never look down their child's throat until the youngster gets sick. They call the doctor and try to describe what they see inside, but they have no means of making a comparison because they never looked at the child's throat when he or she was healthy. By examining what's normal, we begin to recognize and identify what's abnormal. Even in a single encounter with someone, you should attempt to note his or her starting position at the beginning of your interaction. Establishing a person's baseline behavior is critical because it allows you to determine when he or she deviates from it, which can be very important and informative. All right. Commandment 6. Always try to watch people for multiple tells, behaviors that occur in clusters or in succession. Before we start with that, I want you to look at the screen, figure 1 on the left, figure 2 on the right. The author has a picture of themselves demonstrating the non-stressed face. Eyes are relaxed and the lips should be full. Figure 2, a stressed face is terse or tense and slightly contorted. Eyebrows are knitted and the forehead is furrowed. If you've been following along with the behavioral table of elements breakdown, where I incorporate the various micro expressions, tutorials, training tutorials, or action units, some of these will look familiar. So pause this and do a screenshot if you want for your own record. Otherwise, we're going to move on. Always try to watch people for multiple tells, behaviors that occur in clusters or in succession. Your accuracy in reading people will be enhanced when you observe multiple tells or clusters of behavior body signals on which to rely. These signals work together like the parts of a jigsaw puzzle. The more pieces of the puzzle you possess, the better your chances of putting them all together and seeing the picture they portray. To illustrate, if I see a business competitor display a pattern of stress behaviors followed closely by pacifying behaviors, I can be more confident that she is bargaining from a position of weakness. This is a very key commandment in the sense that it reinforces what I've already been breaking down in the training on the Ellipsis behavioral table of elements by Chase Hughes. Those element cards have in there, as discussed previously, confirming gestures, amplifying gestures, microphysiological displays on one side of the card, and on the other side, it has conflicting behaviors. And then you take the score that's at the 6 o'clock position of the element card, and you tally that up with the confirming or amplifying or microphysiological, or you deduct for the contradictory behavior. And then you're able to establish the puzzle pieces fit together what it is that would be the deception rating scale number. And that's he's not discussing that in this book, but that's what he's describing. That's the value of that table. And that's why we've been covering it for the last month or so. And we'll continue as we keep going through it because there's a lot of information in there, as much as there is a lot of information in this book. Commandment 7. It's important to look for changes in a person's behavior that can signal changes in thoughts, emotions, interest, or intent. Sudden changes in behavior can help reveal how a person is processing information or adapting to emotional events. A child who is exhibiting giddiness and delight at the prospect of entering a theme park will change his behavior immediately upon learning the park is closed. Adults are no different. When we get bad news over the phone or see something that can hurt us, our bodies reflect that change immediately. Changes in a person's behavior can also reveal his or her interest or intention in certain circumstances. Careful observation of such changes can allow you to predict things before they happen, clearly giving you an advantage, particularly if the impending action could cause harm to you or others. And then he instructs us to go to box insert 6, but we need to read box insert 5 first. It's a relative matter. Imagine for a moment that you're the parent of an 8-year-old boy who is waiting in line to greet relatives at a large family reunion. As this is a yearly ritual, You have stood with your son on numerous occasions while he waited his turn to say hello to everyone. He has never hesitated to run up and give family members a big hug. However, on this occasion, when it comes to time to embrace his Uncle Harry, he stands stiff and frozen in place. What's the matter? You whisper to him, pushing him toward his waiting uncle. Your son doesn't say anything, but he is very reluctant to respond to your physical signal. What should you do? The important thing to note here is that your son's behavior is a deviation from his baseline behavior. In the past, he has never hesitated to greet his uncle with a hug. Why the change in behavior? His freeze response suggests he feels threatened or something negative. All right, so I've included here one of the maps from the behavior table of elements to demonstrate what's being discussed. As you can see, the element card is in the center and it's listed as F as in Foxtrot, Z as in Zulu, or freeze. It's yellow, and yellow is the indicator of stress, right? So we already know that yellow is a stress response on the color chart. It's not just stress, but high stress. In addition to that, we see that fear is the conflicting behavior. What is the amplifying gesture is genital protection, and you can't see it as well because my arrow unfortunately covered it up, but the cultural prevalence is M. And if we go to the chart, if I'm not mistaken, it means men, but why it's in that position, yeah, okay, so yeah, if it has an M, it just means men, no matter what, all right? So that's, and it's the age-old joke, cruel and as insensitive as it is, you know, the kneeing somebody in the crotch, a man in the crotch is supposed to drop him to his knees, but I mean, baseball catchers wear cups. Most ball players, it only takes one hit before they decide to wear a, a cup, no matter what position they play. But so genital protection is the hand masking of the crotch area in men. Protecting is the arms, crossing of the arms. It's closed position. And blink rate. So, to go back to genital protection, you'll see that the color is gray, and as discussed previously, that represents deceptive and or stress. So you have a high stress card with a deceptive stress card, plus then you have blink rate, which indicates the, make sure I tell you the right thing, variable. So right off the bat, you got two stress cards on something, and it ties into what Agent Navarro is discussing here. And as I demonstrated by my example with my youngest child, in a social situation, parents don't want their children to shame them socially because it represents that you're a poor parent. But we can't allow our desire to be socially accepted to override what it is that our children are telling us that is an indicator of something deeper. And in my case, it was having trained my youngest child how to read body language and then calling it out when it was identified. In this example, it's, where did we leave off? His freeze response suggests he feels threatened or something negative. Perhaps there is no justified reason for his fear, but to the observant and sensibly cautious parent, a warning signal should go off. Your son's deviation from his previous behavior suggests that something negative might have occurred between him and his uncle since their last meeting. Perhaps it was a simple disagreement, the awkwardness of youth, or a reaction to the uncle's preferential treatment of others. Then again, this behavior might indicate something much more sinister. The point is that a change in a person's baseline behavior suggests that something might be amiss, and in this particular case, probably warrants further attention. And I want to highlight that as I'm recording this, it's the last day of March, and March is Women's Month. And I've spent a significant amount of time providing examples of women who do these types of abuses also, whether it's neglect, kidnapping, torture, or inappropriate adult behaviors that traumatize a child. So don't let the example fixate solely that it's only going to be a male doing any kind of abuse. Recognize that this is not restrained to only men doing this. Women are just as violent as men. And if you don't believe me, research a woman named Erin Pizzey who ran domestic abuse shelters and would admonish the women who would always be, oh, I'm the victim, I'm the victim. But she would have them detail it and make them admit to being the perpetrator of the abuse in a lot of the cases. And when actual documentation comes out, you find out that it's like 47-53. Um, I mean, that's not quite a 50-50 split, but it's pretty darn close as to who initiates and who receives. All right, perhaps it was a simple disagreement, awkwardness of youth, or a reaction to the uncle's preferential treatment. We read that. The point is that a change in a person's baseline behavior suggests that something might be amiss. All right, this ties into March 31, the news report about the teacher in New Jersey, where the mother noticed the son's behavior was different, and that her daughter, the son's sister, noticed the son, her brother's behavior being different with the teacher that was charged with inappropriate behavior. So that ties into this. It's not quite a freeze thing on the son's part because he was in the car with her, but when there's a change, a deviation from a baseline, you need to identify it. And that brings us to commandment number 8. Learning to detect false or misleading nonverbal signals is also critical. The ability to differentiate between authentic and misleading cues takes practice and experience. It requires not only concerted observation, but also some careful judgment. In the chapters to come, I will teach you the subtle differences in a person's actions that reveal whether a behavior is honest or dishonest, increasing your chances of getting an accurate read on the person with whom you are dealing. And this will be covered most likely, as he said, in a future chapter. But the biggest way to notice something is after you've established a baseline of how somebody reacts to, questions and stimuli, is incongruent actions. You hear a pop in the distance, right? It's a natural reaction for a person to immediately turn to the direction of that sound, that pop. An incongruent action would be if you hear it to your right, but the person you're with that's walking parallel with you, shoulder to shoulder, turns to the left. That's not congruent. It's incongruent. Why are they turning to the left? Are they looking for, to see your reaction to the action, or are they looking away from the action because there's debris? There's context that has to be looked at. But if an incongruent behavior is displayed, you have to understand what is the reason. And like he said, they'll be covered more in future chapters. Commandment 9, knowing how to distinguish between comfort and discomfort will help you to focus on the most important behaviors for decoding nonverbal communications. One thing that I've noticed that makes it difficult to interact with women is For example, my mother has a habit of crossing her arms. And when I described that to her, I said, well, that's a closed body language. You're not interested in what it is I have to say, so I'm going to drop the topic. And she would push and say, no, I'm just cold. Be aware of the microphysiological. Perhaps somebody is just easily chilled because of, you know, a medical condition, perhaps, or their age, or the environment. They could be wrapped with attention, but they might be so focused on your story, but they are subconsciously binding themselves up tight to keep the body heat in. Having studied nonverbal behavior most of my adult life, I have come to realize that there are two principal things that we should look for and focus on: comfort and discomfort. This is fundamental to how I teach nonverbal communications. Learning to read comfort and discomfort cues, behaviors, and others accurately will help you to decipher what their bodies and minds are truly saying. If in doubt as to what a behavior means, ask yourself if this looks like a comfort behavior, contentment, happiness, relaxation, or if it looks like a discomfort behavior, displeasure, unhappiness, stress, anxiety, tension. Most of the time, you will be able to place observed behaviors in one of these two domains, comfort versus discomfort. I want to pause before we go on to the insert and the next commandment. I had a neighbor that, for whatever reason, didn't drive, and he was significantly younger than I am. But he would message me and say, "Hey, I'll pay you if you can come pick me up from work or drop me off at work or whatever." And my schedule was more relaxed than his, so I would do that. And in the course of after picking him up and then driving to the destination, I would attempt to have a conversation with him, and he would lean towards the door, looking out the window, and I would just stop talking because it's like, okay, fine, I'll take your money because you're being rude and you're obviously not interested in what it is I have to say. And that's fine. There's no obligation that somebody has to listen to what I have to say. But then after a period of time, it'd make a remark. And you know, whether it was a period of time during that ride or it was weeks later that something would come up and I'd be like, I would draw attention to it, stating, hey, you blew me off. I was attempting to have a conversation with you, so I just stopped bothering to have a conversation with you. Oh yeah, I was probably stoned. This is goes into what I was uh, drawing attention to at the beginning of the conversation, or at the beginning of the readings, at the beginning of chapter one, is that I have found that my ability to read somebody's body language, because of the way that I was raised and the life that I've led, being exposed to drug users was foreign. And now that drug use is so rampant and bordering, if not already, on permissible, my ability to understand somebody's body language based on that isn't accurate. And it's part of the reason I'm going back over this is to become more proficient and to see if that can be addressed. Because of the, marijuana and heroin are muscle relaxant type things, that put you in an altered state. Um, you know, I want to be able to read somebody's body language accurately and be able to comprehend. For example, law enforcement does a lot of drunk driving testing. In Oregon, there's a place called Camp Rylea where the state police will invite participants to get drunk and drive a controlled course so that their patrol officers can gain experience in recognizing inhibited behavior and driving. And I imagine other states have similar programs. So something to look into if you like to get a free drink, I guess. But Commandment 10. When observing others, be subtle about it. Using nonverbal behavior requires you to observe people carefully and decode their nonverbal behaviors accurately. However, one thing you don't want to do when observing others is to make your intentions obvious. Many individuals tend to stare at people when they first try to spot nonverbal cues. Such intrusive observation is not advisable. Your ideal goal is to observe others without their knowing it, in other words, unobtrusively. Work at perfecting your observational skills, and you will reach a point where your efforts will be both successful and subtle. It's all a matter of practice and persistence. You have now been introduced to your part of our partnership, the 10 commandments you need to follow to decode nonverbal communication successfully. The question now becomes, what nonverbal behaviors should I be looking for, and what important information do they reveal? This is where I come in. All right, before we continue, we need to go back and read the box insert number 6. And I want to point out what he was discussing. Those that perform paramedic emergency responder training would probably be able to tell you this better than I. But what I was trained, because the jobs I've had, I was considered a primary first responder. And that is when you are getting somebody's vital statistics, one of the things you need to get is breath rate. But the surest way to get a false breath rate is to let your subject know, your patient, your client, whatever you want to call them, let them know that you have to get their breath rate. The best way to do that is when you're using the blood pressure cuff, to establish what their blood pressure is, or when you're getting their heart rate, either by the index and middle finger on the inside of the wrist or the stethoscope, but then using your peripheral vision to count over the period of 20, 30, 40, 60 seconds what their breath rate is per minute. So it's harder to control your breath rate, or excuse me, it's harder to control your heart rate than it is your breath rate. Both can be controlled, but it's easier to be able to manipulate your breath rate. So if you want to be able to get a better indication of whether somebody is breathing naturally, you have to baseline them and get their breath rate in the course of normal interactions, and then observe it for any deviation from that. So, box number 6, a nose for trouble. Among the most important nonverbal clues to a person's thoughts are changes in body language that constitute intention cues. These are behaviors that reveal that what a person is about to do and provide the competent observer with extra time to prepare for the anticipated action before it takes place. One personal example of how critical it is to watch for changes in people's behavior, particularly when the changes involve intention cues, involves an attempted robbery of a store where I worked. In this particular situation, I noticed a man standing near the cash register at the checkout counter, a behavior that caught my attention because he seemed to have no reason to be there. He wasn't waiting in line and hadn't purchased any items. Moreover, the entire time he stood there, his eyes were fixed on the cash register. Men, pay attention to this. This is how people will perceive you as creepy, as if you give off this kind of lingering behavior if you have a desire to make an approach on the cute clerk. This is how creepy behavior gets confused or misconstrued with social anxiety. If he had just remained quietly where he was, I eventually would have lost interest in him and focused my attention elsewhere. However, while I was still observing him, his behavior changed. Specifically, his nostrils starting not his nostrils starting flaring, which is the nasal wing dilation, which is covered in the behavioral table of elements, which was a giveaway that he was oxygenating in advance of taking some action. All right, let's pause for a moment. We've Most of us have seen some kind of police video, dash cam video, where they've interacted with an individual that they've pulled over, where the driver will hop out. And in this case, Agent Navarro is discussing wing dilation of the nostrils to increase oxygenization of the blood. Another action is when an opponent begins flapping their arms, extending their arms out rapidly as in a crucifix pose, and retracting them in. That increases blood flow also to oxygenate their limbs. When that happens, a violence is most likely about to occur. All right, so we're at nasal wing dilation, which was a giveaway that he was oxygenating in advance of taking some action. I guessed what that action was going to be about a second before it occurred, and a second was all I had to sound a warning. I yelled to the cashier, "Watch out," as three things happened at once. A. The clerk finished ringing up a sale, causing the cash drawer to open. B. The man near the register lunged forward, plunging his hand into the drawer to grab some cash. And C. Alerted by my shouted warning, the cashier grabbed the man's hand and twisted it, causing the would be robber to drop the money and run out of the store. Had I not spotted his intention cue, I am sure the thief would have succeeded in his efforts. Incidentally, the cashier was my father, who was running a small hardware store in Miami back in 1974. I was his summer hire. So he had an invested interest in protecting his father's business, you know. But anything that you're interacting in, you'll find this to be the case. That maintaining your situational awareness is critical to survival. Identifying important nonverbal behaviors and their meanings. Consider this: the human body is capable of giving off literally thousands of nonverbal signals or messages. Which ones are most important, and how do you decode them? The problem is that it could take a lifetime of painstaking observation, evaluation, and validation to identify and interpret important nonverbal communications accurately. Fortunately, with the help of some very gifted researchers and my practical experience as an FBI expert on nonverbal behavior, we can take a more direct approach to get you on your way. I have already identified those nonverbal behaviors that are most important. So you can put this unique knowledge to immediate use. We have also developed a paradigm or model that makes reading nonverbals easier. Even if you forget exactly what a specific body signal means, you will still be able to decipher it. As you read through these pages, you will learn certain information about nonverbal behavior that has never been revealed in any other text on body language, including examples of nonverbal behavioral clues used to solve actual FBI cases. Some of the material will surprise you. For example, if you had to choose the most honest part of a person's body, the part that would most likely reveal an individual's true feeling or intentions, which part would you select? Take a guess. Once I reveal the answer, you'll know a prime place to look when attempting to decide what a business associate, family member, date, or total stranger is thinking, feeling, or intending. I will also explain the physiological basis for nonverbal behavior, the role the brain plays in nonverbal behavior. I will also reveal the truth about detecting deception as no counterintelligence agent has done before. I firmly believe that understanding the biological basis for body language will help you appreciate how nonverbal behavior works and why it is such a potent predictor of human thoughts, feelings, and intentions. Therefore, I start the next chapter with a look at that magnificent organ, the human brain, and show how it governs every facet of our body language. Before I do so, however, I will share an observation concerning the validity of using body language to understand and assess human behavior. All right, before we get too far along, um, we've already covered what that is, the body part that he's going to describe. But leave in the comments if you know what that is. And before we continue on, I'm going to stop the video and take care of some personal things. And I will resume with what's called For Whom the Tells Toll. And it deals with it's called a Terry stop. And it was Terry versus Ohio. And it's, you know, it's the thing that gives police the ability to frisk people without. So that's going to be covered here in the next reading.